morning. This is Stan in Gainesville with an E, Florida, and you are listening to Light Talk.
Hi, this is Steve in Dallas, Texas. And today we have a very exciting interview on Light Talk.
And this is David in beautiful Long Beach, California. And if you don't already know, you are listening to Light Talk, and we are the Lumen Brothers.
All of us and our sister.
All of us and our sister, who's not here today, but she'll be here soon again, which would be great.
We hope you.
We always think of Anne. But anyway, today is a special day. It's a special episode. This is episode.
What's special about it, David?
Well,
Tell
this
us.
is episode 105, which means that this is the beginning of season 3 of Light Talk with the Lumen Brothers.
You know, I just gotta say, I can't believe we haven't divorced ourselves. It's going on too long.
Well, you know, some of us have divorced over these past 3 years.
That's true. You know what? I'm a bachelor this month. I have no female energy in the house all month.
Oh, boy. Well, I have female energy, but it comes from my dog.
At least that's fuzzy.
So she's a fuzzy girl. But anyway, and today, as a very special episode, our episode number 1 of season 3, we have a great Broadway designer here.
I think we've been working on this for about 2 years. It's been at least a year and a half since we've been talking to Zak, right?
Has it been? No.
I don't know.
I haven't spoken to Zak in a while, but he's been a very busy guy, and we have some mutual friends. And boy, are we glad that we nailed him for our first show of the 3rd season. So, speaking of Zak, Stan, why don't you give us a little intro to Zak's bio?
Okay, but getting Zak's information condensed is hard, so be patient with me. I'm going to do my best to read you all the amazing things that this designer has done. So Zak's Broadway credits include the long-running hit Rock of Ages, also London, Australia, Vegas, Toronto, Norwegian Caribbean Line's national and European tours. To go on, Holla If You Hear Me, No Man's Land, and Waiting for Godot with Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen. Evita, Lombardi, Drama Desk nomination, Elf, A Catered Affair, another Drama Desk nomination, and Xanadu.
That's a song.
Some regional credits include Jesus Christ Superstar at the Signature, Virginia, the Helen Hayes, and that one got a Helen Hayes Award.
Wow.
Good Faith at the Yale Rep, Sunday in the Park with George at the Huntington in Boston, Smart People at Second Stage with the Hughes Award nomination, and the Colored Museum. Cool show, I've done that. Huntington and the IRNE Award. Additional designs include the Radio City Music Hall Christmas Spectacular, which everyone should see, Peep Show Vegas, and Voyage de la Vie in beautiful downtown Singapore. He's also an accomplished bassist from and trained at the Berklee College of Music. So Zak is also an award-winning visual storyteller whose work has been seen all over this world. He's designed dozens of Broadway shows, Las Vegas spectaculars, circuses, concerts, theme park attractions, museum installations, corporate events, and art installations. Additionally, Zak is highly in demand as a consultant for many of the industry's top hardware manufacturers, software developers, and entertainment venues. He's the content advisor for live design at LDI and X Live conferences, and has created college courses on the art of theatrical storytelling for both Emerson College, NYU, Yale, and SUNY Purchase. He's also a principal designer for Mode Studios, a hybrid experience agency. I don't think I left anything out, Zak, but that's quite a list.
I think I'm done.
I think you can retire now.
Welcome to Light Talk, Zak.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, man, it's an honor to have you. And, you know, it was so funny because you got on this show, and we've been thinking about, having you on the show for a while. But it was a mutual friend who suggested putting you on the show.
Yes. Was that Mr. Otto, Driscoll Otto?
Driscoll Otto. And I'm sure Driscoll told you about, I met Driscoll on a show. We actually worked together in Florence. And we had a great time. And then, he spoke about the shows he's done with you. And of course, and he says, you really need to get Zak on. I said, okay, absolutely.
Yeah, Driscoll's a great guy.
Yeah, he told me that you're a fan of the show.
Oh, absolutely. You've had a lot of guests on here that I adored. Josh White, who I collaborate with from time to time, and Ann Militello, who's a partner of mine with Mode Studios, And of course, we've all met and stuff before, so I just was like, these guys are so fun and funny, and you made Driscoll sound really great, so I figured I had to get on there.
Well, you got to be part of the Lumen Brother family.
Exactly. Now, are these antsy lumens or just regular lumens?
Oh, God.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think maybe we should become the Candela Brothers.
There you go. The Foot Candle Brothers.
Candle Brothers. Put your foot in your mouth, Candle Brothers.
No. Actually, we're Luma Suck or we're Fanta Black Brothers.
Fanta Black, yes.
We're the Fanta Black Brothers. Okay, there we go. All right, so let's get started. Steve has our first question.
Zach, can you tell us the story of your origins as a projection designer, and what exactly is the Wendell School?
That's a really fun question. So the origin of my design world actually comes from my dad. So my dad, when I was growing up on Long Island, was a teacher of stagecraft, and he ran the drama club at a high school out in Lake Ronkonkoma. And as a kid, it was sort of like we spent Saturdays with our dad in the theater while he was teching whatever show he was working on, either at school or at various theaters around Long Island. And, my dad saw that I was interested. And so I actually formed my own little consulting company around age 7 or 8. I think it was called Better Than Life Ideas. And he would let me help design the scenery. And it was a really fun thing. And he actually had several students who have gone on to work professionally in theater. One of them being the set designer, David Gallo.
Oh, wow. And
so David and I remained good friends. He actually started out life as my babysitter when I was 7.
I love
it. And I kind of went off my sister and I both were involved in the performing arts in various ways. She studied to become a theatrical director and then moved on into TV and film. And I studied bass, as you guys said earlier. I went to Berklee College of Music I wanted to be a jazz bass player when I grew up. So my day job was doing, web video and graphic design and stuff like that, because I always had a, interest and knowledge with working with computers. And one day, I saw the Broadway show, the Rocky Horror Show, at Circle in the Square, and it had video in it. And I said to Dave Gallo, this was my light bulb moment. And I saw that it was like the combination of my interests with music and my interests with the computers and my interests with doing design with my dad when I was a kid. I said, David, I don't know if these people are hiring, but I'd like you to introduce me to them. Their names were Batwin and Robin Productions, Linda Batwin and Robin Silvestri. And so I went and I met with them, and they were really excited because they do all kinds of amazing stuff, but, a lot of the people that work with them didn't love sitting in a dark theater all day. They liked natural light for some reason. So they hired me, and I was going to be sort of like the gopher, the computer fixer guy, and then learn how to do theater stuff. And the day they hired me was actually September 10th, 2001. So obviously the next day...
We all know that, right?
Yeah.
We know
the next day, the entertainment industry had a big change, but I was very lucky that they said, we're going to keep you on, you're going to work here, you're going to learn whatever you want to learn. And at the time, really, that kind of apprenticeship was the only way to learn projection design. And so when I say the Wendell School, what that is at a certain point, after working with Linda and Robin and having amazing exposure to museum work and corporate work and theatrical work, there came a point where I was like, if I want to go further in theater, I need to contact the woman who created the game.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so I wrote a handwritten letter to Wendell because I was told she would appreciate a handwritten letter. And she said, come on, let's go. And away we went. And I got to learn all the stuff that she later turned into a curriculum at Yale. And I got paid for it instead of having to pay for it, which was nice.
Right.
But
learn while you earn.
Exactly. And we jokingly call it the Wendell School because at that time, almost everybody who did projection design in New York had worked for her at some point. There was me, there was Michael Clark, who did Jersey Boys, and Sage Carter, and Elaine McCarthy, who did Wicked. Even Linda and Robin had worked with Wendell on Tommy. So really, for the majority of people who did theatrical projections at that point, worked with Wendell. So that was the Wendell School.
That's pretty amazing. I'm going to just throw you a curveball here because you
Sure.
said you're from Long Island.
Yes.
And I'm from Long Island, too. I was born in Elmont. So we have two Long Islanders here.
Wait. Technically, I was born on Long Island because Brooklyn is part of that same island.
That's a
Just
stretch,
the eastern
man.
end.
My
So there we
Uncle
go. We're all
Arnold-
from the same brain basket.
I don't know. We're from New York, all right?
Right.
Yeah, we are.
Three New Yorkers.
I think I could tell.
And you also mentioned something about playing bass. And as you know
Yes.
from listening to the show, I got into theater through music as well.
Yes.
So I'm going to just throw you a curveball here and ask you
Sure.
what in your musical background informs you about your design work?
Well, part of the curriculum that I created when I was teaching at Emerson has this idea that I call the visual art of music, where I talk about how in most Western music, there's melody, there's harmony, and there's rhythm, and those components make up music. And that visually, we want to find a way to have those elements as well. The melody meaning like the main way the story is being delivered. Is it from an actor with his monologue? Is it through dance? Is it through, a scene, whatever that is? And then the harmony is how that's framed. Is that framed with lighting? Is it framed with scenery? And the rhythm is how does that stuff move? Is it like choreography? It's blocking. So I feel like the most successful designs visually, you can sort of feel those components gelling together.
Yeah, in a non-static art form like theater.
Yeah, it's a bit like jazz for me too. Mm-hmm. Just like this idea of the storytelling, and it's almost like an improvisatory storytelling thing in jazz, where you can play a certain chord and you'll feel sad or you'll feel happy, and how and why do these things work, and then how can we do these things visually? What kind of things, when we see certain colors, do they make us have certain emotions? And a lot of what I jokingly say is in projection design that I borrow the term from psychology, and that I'm projecting my ideas onto the audience. Like I'm trying to push them to feel a certain way.
And what's really interesting when you talk about chords and melody lines making you have a certain emotion, it also depends on what preceded that chord and what's after
absolutely.
that chord, which is really the essence of what we do as designers, as lighting designers and projection designers, because it's all relative. The images are moving, and you can have something that's deep blue with a blue background or something like that, and that will feel a lot bluer if you had something that was red before it or yellow after it instead of lavenders.
Absolutely.
Now that's a real basic example, but that's what's so beautiful about the music of light, especially in this art form. Mm-hmm. And you talk about jazz. I mean, Stan and I and Steve have talked about this before, about feeling like we're sort of jazz players when we're creating shows at the table.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's really exciting to me. I mean, that's really cool.
Totally. Yeah, it's like creating the feeling to the audience, like when you're talking about color, just that idea, like we establish what white is, the color for white, that it may be a cream color or even a yellow color, but whatever, once we've established that, then it doesn't have to be pure burning hot white, or, when, for a projection designer who loves an all white set, and then you have a director asking, how come I see everything in the blackout? We can establish sort of like a state that's like a blue out, sometimes I'll call it. It's like we can tell the audience when we go to this place, this is what that means. And then the audience will follow and trust us, hopefully.
Yeah, it's like setting conventions. I mean, it was funny. A couple of weeks ago, we were talking about what white light was. What is it really? And that was one of our questions. We said it's whatever you want it to be. Because as long as you establish it, that this is white,
exactly,
then it's white.
Exactly.
I think you're talking about, Zach, as a vocabulary. that is specific to the work, and then the audience allows themselves to sort of adapt to that vocabulary. And what some of that is by volition, by choice, the willing suspension of disbelief, or allowing you to have that vocabulary. And the other is biological, with the white light idea, the chromaticity of a light from warm to cool. The brain adapts to that, and so there's two features there. There's a volition that you're inviting the audience to accept your vocabulary, and then there's also the part where you're manipulating the biology.
Totally.
Yeah. So I heard this story about you, Zach, playing bass in Rock of Ages.
Yes.
Rock of Ages.
Can you tell us about that?
Sure.
What's that about?
So early in my career, when I was doing a bunch of shows with Dave Gallo, since he had known me since I was a little kid and knew that I played bass and knew how proficient I was at it, he would always joke like that my fantasy was that someday something would happen and they'd be like, "Is there a bass player in the house?" And so one day when we're working on Rock of Ages in Las Vegas, the bass player has an emergency and he has to leave. And I had told everybody involved that I played bass, but they didn't know that I really played the bass.
Right.
And so when they said we can't rehearse without the bass player, I said I'll do it. And this is a good story because it also involves Driscoll. So Driscoll had been asking me for many years to assist on a show as the projection associate, so that he could start to learn about projections. And this was the first time we were able to do that. So Driscoll moved from being the associate lighting designer of Rock of Ages in New York to the associate projection designer. And part of the reason we thought that would be good is because we thought it would be an easier gig since we were remounting something as opposed to making something new. So the rest of the team, when the bass player has to leave, says, "Okay, why don't we let Zach go up there and make an ass of himself? Because who knows if he can really play bass."
Yeah, but you blew him away.
Yeah, I went up there and I nailed it because
of course,
that's great.
Growing up on Long Island, you had to know those songs. That was the law.
That's right.
But then Driscoll, of course, is left at the console by himself, like very nervous. Because he knows how to hit the space bar, but what happens if we get to a cue that's not been programmed yet?
Right.
So he was very relieved when the bass player came back the next day. The other part of that is then my wife was pregnant and she actually gave birth 6 weeks early, so I had to leave.
Oh my God.
Totally leaving Driscoll by himself. And like a rock star, he downloaded the manual and he nailed it. And that's when he became a projection designer.
I love Driscoll.
Isn't that great?
He's amazing.
Wow.
Okay, now I have a couple of questions here.
Sure.
First of all, are you a union member? Do you belong to the American Federation of Musicians?
I do not.
Okay, did you get union scale for that?
I did not, and it was in Vegas. I don't think that was an issue.
Oh, it was Vegas. Okay, for some reason I thought this was on Broadway.
No, but the music coordinator for Broadway and I had a discussion about it later, and I was put on the sub list, and he said there's probably a way we'll grandfather you in if we have to.
That's fantastic. And the second question has to do with, who's your favorite bass player?
Oh, that's a tough one. But I would say my favorite bass player is probably Chris Squire from Yes.
Oh, okay. All right.
I can see that. Yeah.
My ex-wife works for Warner Music, and she always gets all these amazing CDs that aren't available to the general public. And one that was, and I got early, was Progeny. It's called Progeny. It's all those Yes tapes from that's mixed correctly.
Oh, really?
Do you have that?
The concerts, right?
Yeah.
Including one at Nassau Coliseum.
Yes, they're all over.
I think I went to that concert.
They're like 10 of them. They're like 10 concerts. They basically play the same set. It's the Yes song set, but it's remastered. So it's not like drowned in reverb and all that crap. And you can hear every single part so well.
Yeah. I listened to some of it this morning, actually.
Oh, I listened to it in the car today. I was listening in the car today.
How interesting.
All good people. I mean, I listened to Close to the Edge, and I just listened to those bass lines. Okay?
Yeah, they're amazing.
I just love them.
In part of my discussion about the way we can draw the emotion from music, I sometimes play the song Perpetual Change.
Of course.
Because there's a part at the end where Chris Squire is playing the fifth of the chord when they're all playing, and it adds tension, and it's just like that idea of how he can just change one tiny element, and it adds this incredible amount of tension that you're like desperate for it to resolve. And then when it does, it's like a celebratory moment.
Oh my God.
And how do we take that and how do we add that visually? Because I feel like that's the kind of thing projections can bring to storytelling in a way that no one else can.
That's fantastic. And two other bass players who do that are Tim Bogert of Vanilla Fudge and John Entwistle.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think the only Yes concert I saw was the one at the Nassau Coliseum in would it have been late 70s, early 80s?
Oh, that would have been a different one than the Progeny ones. Those were like 1971.
Yeah.
70. No, that could have been me. I don't know. No,
it was the Close to the Edge tour.
Yeah,
and it was
exactly.
when Bill Bruford left right before the tour.
Right.
Alan White had 2 weeks to learn that set before they went on tour.
I just remember the lasers too. That was the first show I saw with lasers, and they were blue and green. And anyway.
Well, the biggest like concert touring set design company, Tate, they got their start doing Yes, and Claire Brothers, who are a huge sound company, they got their start with Yes also.
Wow. So, Zach, where do you feel your place is in collaboration on specific projects? Like, in what cases are you closer to the lighting designer, and what cases are you closer to the set designer?
That is a really interesting question, and I'm glad you asked. When I won the Helen Hayes Award last year for Jesus Christ Superstar, I was co-nominated with Jason Lyons for lighting. And in last year's Helen Hayes Awards, there was someone else who was co-nominated along with scenery for their projection work. And in the past for, the Drama Desk Awards for Lombardi, I was co-nominated with scenery. For Catered Affair, they had a separate category for it. And I've always found it kind of fascinating, not just where do I consider my work connected to the other disciplines, but also where other people as other designers and also viewers or guests or whatever we want to call patrons, where they see it connected. I think that there's a technical connection to lighting design in that the way it's cued, maybe, that it's a series of cues that happen over time most of the time, and that's more akin to lighting than scenery, unless you have something that's like a seriously automated set. But I tend to feel that as a graphic art, that for the most part it lays more in the scenic design world. If we have to say that it's connected to someone and not its own thing, I've always felt that it's more connected to scenic design in terms of what the actual thing is, as opposed to the cueing of it and the way that it moves, which is a lot more like the fluidity of lighting.
Makes sense, that answer. And I've heard it expressed that way from Michael Clark, who now teaches for us. Says the same thing, and he is a scene designer as well. He knows enough about lighting, but he's not going to program a console. And I think it's true that, and content-wise, some lighting designers tend to have a sense of content, but I don't. I'm not sure what to put up behind the actor, but I think the scenic designers really do.
Yeah, I always do. I think it depends on how you're trained. And where and really what your background is, and the directors you work with.
Yeah, I mean, there's different kinds of designs too. I mean, the origin of the Wendell School, when Wendell Harrington was brought in to do the projections in the late 70s for They're Playing Our Song, it was sort of like Doug Schmidt, he's doing the set, he realizes there's a fluidity he can't achieve with just traditional scenery, and that there's this sort of graphic look that he wants that he can't make with scenery, and that it could only be achieved by creating images with light. And so he calls this woman, Wendell, and she says, okay, I'll figure this out. And she makes a bunch of slides. And it was, we would say by today's standards, it was fairly rudimentary, but that it was a wholly new thing at that time.
Right.
This idea of merging those things. And it was sort of like helping to create the environment, but that there's also, there are shows where it's literally helping to create the environment. It's creating backdrops. It's creating, scenes and scenarios that we couldn't make with scenery. But then there's also times where it has the ability to have personality, and it has the ability to evoke emotion in a way that you couldn't with, scenery. But at the same time, I will always say, having seen some shows that break this rule, that there are times where, like, as an audience member, I need to see a person in a chair holding a telephone to believe that they're on the phone. Like standing in front of a giant LED screen, leaning so it looks like they're on a phone. I'm never going to buy that.
I said, speaking of Jesus Christ Superstar, there's some pretty good bass lines in that one, too.
Yes.
The original recording.
Yeah. I actually, for my 40th birthday, my wife got me a ukulele bass. There's a running joke in my family that in every tech, there's a moment where like I get frustrated and throw the headset, and if it's really bad, I might break the headset. And she said, this ukulele bass is your therapy now. And so when you feel that moment where you want to do that, you can play your little bass. And it has been amazing and wonderful. And I bring it to shows and I play along. And I guess in a way, it's like my calling card. I'm the guy who has the little bass. And when I don't bring it, I have directors and designers that are like, where's the little bass?
That's funny.
I hear you have a story about your kid meeting the cast of Hamilton.
Yes.
What's going on with that?
So much like myself, my children have grown up having a dad who works in entertainment industry, and when they want to spend time with dad, that meant like dropping them off at the theater. And I think that my kids didn't realize that that was not the norm. So, for instance, I have a lot of connections, and I've done some work with Disney, and my older son, there were many times where he would be talking about like the Haunted Mansion with kids in his preschool, and they would just look at him with eyes glazed over because they had no idea what a haunted mansion was, let alone the Haunted Mansion. And so my son he came to assume that going backstage, meeting the cast, that was all like natural stuff. And so, of course, he was one of the first kids in his class to discover Hamilton, and he loved it. And so we went to see it, and we went backstage because we knew some people in the cast, and we had a great time. But then he didn't actually get to meet Lin-Manuel Miranda, and he was very upset. And then we went outside, and he was kind of crying. Oh. And then Lin walked out the front, and he ran over to him, almost tackled him, and he got to meet him. And,
oh, my God.
And I'll tell you, it was early enough in the Hamilton craze that when he went back to school and told everybody, they were like, who's that?
Yeah, right.
It's just like it's been an interesting learning curve for him that Hamilton has helped him to realize that not everybody has access to this stuff. And that he's lucky, and that, then we went to see Frozen, and of course, the woman who plays Princess Anna was his nanny when he was little. So we got to go see her, and again, I had to remind him, but this is not normal life. You live in a bubble.
Yeah, but at least he appreciates it. That's a wonderful thing.
Yeah,
that he actually appreciates it. A lot of kids don't. They don't realize it.
He totally appreciates it, and I'm taking advantage of his 10-year-old brilliance and creativity, because when I work on stuff for Disney and they say, like, what would be the ultimate thing for a 10-year-old? I'm like, hey, Leo, what would be the ultimate thing for a 10-year-old? And then I write it down, and they're like, wow, you think like a 10-year-old. That's amazing. Yeah.
So speaking of Disney, why don't you tell us about your theme park obsession?
So my father, when I was a kid, he was obsessed with Disney stuff. And then, like many Long Islanders, in around 1982, we packed up the Pea Green family truckster and drove to Florida to the opening of Epcot. And my dad was just like blown away by it. And I think one of the things that he really loved was like, in a way, it was like it's theater where you're unexpectedly the star of the show. In a way. So you go into these attractions like Peter Pan's Flight or something like that, and you're Peter Pan. That's why it works. That's how it works. And I think that the other part of it too is, in a way, it's sort of like if VR was reality, because especially in Florida, where they have an enormous property, they have the ability to control everything you see in every direction, and the whole thing unfolds like a movie. So when you turn to the right, there's it's like a wipe, and you go over to Tomorrowland, and there it is. So at an early age, we started going to Disney World when I was a kid, and then as I got older, I got excited to bring my own kids there. And then I guess around 6 years ago, some folks from Imagineering invited me out there to come see some stuff they were working on. And I was like hooked. I was already sold, but like that was it. I was just like, this is the coolest thing ever, because it's like everything we do in theater, especially in the projection world, like they've been doing for 20 years already.
Right.
Or they have whatever we're going to be doing in 20 years cooking up now. But that idea, in another way of that's another kind of like connecting with audiences in a way that's a combination of theater and music that I just love. One of the things that I found so pleasing in my work in theater that I didn't get from music is that I could stand behind everyone and see them enjoy it and experience it. When you're performing, as much as I love performing, you don't really get to see it the same way because you're involved in it. So like just watching the guests at theme parks, and it's a really fascinating thing to see the magic, especially when you see like the way little kids' brains are activated through it. It's just very exciting.
So do you have any advice that you would offer to young designers who might not be sure how projections will fit into their professional goals?
Sure. I mean, I can tell you this again with Driscoll, that when Driscoll graduated from NYU and he had this idea that he wanted to do projections, he contacted me. It was, the projection design world, even though it's getting bigger every day and every year, is still a pretty small world. And everybody in that world, you'll find, is actually very friendly and very happy to chat. And I always felt like I'm the kind of guy who will ask for help or advice until somebody tells me to leave them alone. And if you're a young person and you want to learn about this stuff, or you just want to chat, all of us have websites, they all have contact info on them. Most of us have our own direct contact info on there. We all are happy to bring new people into the world. I think that's an important thing. I know I have an uncle who works in marketing, and he's like, "You're training your competition." And I said, right. I hope that I am. That's the goal. Right. I want people that are going to be good and are going to be motivated. So I would always say, if you're interested in this, then just reach out and say, "Hey, do you have anything going on? Can I come hang out? Can I watch what you're doing?"
That's how you do it. We've said this 100 times on the show.
We have. And you know what I want to add? Thank you for saying that, Zach. And I think to all the students out there, listen to Zach. He's a sweet guy. He's open. Don't be afraid.
Yeah.
Pick up the phone, open the email. It's not that kind of world anymore. It is, people are open to you, and we're not really just training our competition. That's sort of that idea comes from a place of fear. The business has gotten bigger, and it will continue to get bigger the more we bring young, ambitious, imaginative people into it.
And you know something? I don't think it's ever been that type of world, because my mentors were Bill and Gene and Ming Cho Lee and Theron. I mean, I met Theron through Bill, and I contacted Theron. I was a student in Miami. She was down here doing something with Chorus Line. I think it was the first national tour, and I contacted her, and she met me. Now I was like 19, 20 years old. That's amazing. So I don't think people ever were like that, because we all realize as theater people that we're a part of one big family. And we're helping each other out.
I think you're right, David. I think it's in the mind of the young designer. We had a nice little chat with Ken Billington the other day. One of our benefactors, who's a producer, piped him in, and he wanted to make sure that all of the lighting students were in the classroom, and I made sure that they were. And then he said, "Oh, we have 8 lighting designers in here." ask some questions. And some of the students, I had to literally push their chair and say, get up and ask. But I remember having coffee with Ken in the 1980s when I was programming, and he's just the sweetest guy you ever want to meet. So you just have to sort of, that's it's in people's imagination. You're right, Dave. I don't think it's real. I think it's imagined, and that's what I'm trying to dispel.
Absolutely, I would agree that there may be one or two stories out there of somebody who was snarky or not nice, and that's certainly possible and maybe even true. But that's also just a story, and it may have been something from like 20 years ago.
Right.
And I would even go as far as to say, when the young people who approach me and they say, "How do I do this?" One of the questions they ask is like, "How do I find work?" I'll say to them, you saw a show that you liked, email that director. Tell him you liked the show. Tell him you want to get coffee and tell them how much you liked the show. Tell that scenic designer you thought that the thing they did was really cool and try to throw in a little detail to show that you were paying attention. All these people, and the worst thing that could happen is they'll say, I don't have time to get together. And then you're where you started anyway.
Right. Well, that's great, Zach. And I think we should end the show right there, because this is really what we're all about. I think, and that's why we do this crazy show, and that's why Zach came on our show today for free. But none of our guests get paid.
Wait, what? Free?
Yeah, there is no remuneration, but you did sign the release, right? So
That's
just
true.
in case we ever make a shekel, you're not getting any.
I need to check with the podcasting
There's no
union.
shekels. There's no shekels here from these New Yorkers, And but Zach, I do remember actually when I first met you. It was at LDI. You were doing the projections masterclass, and you said some of the most amazing and inspirational things I ever heard a lighting designer, projection designer say. And I want to thank you for putting that class together. And I recommend anyone, if you do this again, I know that you're the consultant, but do you do this every year at LDI?
Almost every year. I didn't do it last year, but yes, and looking for other opportunities too.
Take his classes. I mean, Zach is is filled with knowledge, and he's got a great delivery, obviously, from hearing him on the show. And also, Zach, finally, Steve, Stan, and I want to thank you for starting off our third season with a huge bang. So thank you for being on the show today. That was wonderful. Hey guys, that Hammond organ solo in the background, and Zach knows what a Hammond organ is, tells us that once again you've spent another morning listening to Light Talk. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our podcast. You can find us on all of your favorite podcast providers. And be sure to subscribe to Light Talk. That way you won't miss 1 second of crazy Lumen insanity.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on this podcast.
But just in case you do decide to litigate us, we have our new law firm. And remember, Flecht, Flocked, Flair, and Glare, and their little paralegal Snoot will defend us until our retirement funds are depleted.
I am Snoot.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers, coming to you from Long Beach, Gainesville, and the Lone Star State.
And be sure to tune in next week when we discuss how our life experiences shaped our artistry, how to clean a psych, luminaire hickeys, and bugs.
Bugs. All of that and the new sponsor, Light Talk. We're just going to keep on broadcasting questionable Lumen knowledge and humor around the world.
And we'll see you all next Saturday morning. Thank you, Zach.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah,
for Light
thank you,
Talk.
Zach. What a great interview.
Light Talk.